So I think we have a couple of seconds left. Now we are 6:30. So we can start. Let me put the presentation on. Okay, and now I should be able to share it. Okay, so we are talking about tools for contract and negotiations. And when we look at automated contracting, we look at a workflow or a cycle of many different things. So it's often it starts with a contract generator. So you use some template, intelligent template, or dumb template, old contract, or some kind of a board template. Erich, hello.
Hello.
I
nice to see you.
I was just starting. If you want to do an introduction.
No, it's yours. I will then eat my commands, but it's your show now, and that's good.
Okay, perfect. Start with a template, with a contract generator, with some kind of starting point. Usually you don't start from scratch. And then there is the contract negotiations, and this is basically the main issue we are addressing today. Then the contract, the final contract is signed. And of course, we don't want to go to revert to paper, so we have electronic signing. Then we store the contract, which is often important to have a long-term storage where if you have electronic signatures, the proof of electronic signature is preserved for a long time. Then, contract signing can be, of course, can also be done on a blockchain if you have a smart contract on a blockchain. And contract execution is also something that you could do on a blockchain, that you could do completely manually, or you could do semi-automatically. And finally, when you do merger and acquisition, you do a contract evaluation. For example, you sell a company that holds a lot of apartments. As we all know, rental contracts are not automatically updated, saying, well, here's your new contract, please agree or move out. This doesn't work, fortunately. So a company that has a lot of apartments usually has a lot of different contracts. And when you do an M&A evaluation assessment, you need to know what kind of contract you have. Also, it's about contract maintenance. Sometimes courts declare some of the clauses as invalid. So you need to update the clauses as long as you can. For example, if you have a marital agreement and you're still in a good relationship, you might be able to replace an invalid clause by a better one. And if you're in front of the divorce court, it might not work anymore. So you have the contract maintenance, and then, of course, your cycle starts again. You renegotiate perhaps different additions or modifications of the contract, and of course, this cycle does not always is not always executed in this order. And we have some parts that can be done by, for example, by blockchain, by smart contracts, by this kind of automation. Some parts are pretty dumb automatization, like a contract generation. This is pretty low tech. And when you do contract evaluation, you could use AI techniques to evaluate, for example, a rental contract. So if you have like 10,000 rental contracts, you don't want to spend thousands of hours to evaluate them, what kind of clauses and conditions are agreed in that contract. So there you can apply AI. So basically, this is the introduction to the topic of automizing contracting. When it comes to contract storage, maybe there's one more point that, of course, there are always at least two parties to contract. So whatever tool you need, it has to be shared somehow by both parties. At least both parties need to be able to access the proof of what has been done and the records of what has been done. Okay, so to make a long story short, I now give the word to Rory. Rory Unsworth. He is partner at InsureBlocks. He is also developing a contract management platform, a contract negotiation management platform, so he can report about the features and challenges of this approach firsthand. So please, Rory, go ahead. I stop my screen sharing now. You should be able to share your screen now too.
Yes, I can. Thank you very much, Joern. Thank you for that introduction. As you say, I am in fact developing something like this, which I can talk you through. Now, the purpose of my presenting today is not to sell you my solution. It's really just to go through, what is this new landscape of contract negotiation execution platforms? What are they comprised of? To complete my introduction, InsureBlocks is a business that does podcasts around digitalization in insurance and offers consultancy services in insurance in respect of digitalization, change management, making the change happen, and also planning tools. And on the other side, I'm developing the Simplyfire tool, which is purely this, a contract negotiation and execution platform. Let me start by showing you a little bit what I'm going to be presenting today. So the first is here I'm explaining what a contract negotiation and execution platform is versus, let's say, a CLM tool or an ERP, whatever it is. Why is this a valuable technology to businesses? And why is it potentially also a valuable technology to owners and other stakeholders? How? So how would you make this happen? How do these things work behind the scenes? And also, what different flavors have you got? And in talking about the flavors of tool available or platform available, whichever you look at it, I'll give you some examples of the different types of offer out there. After that, I will look at the topic, because we're talking here about marrying up the theory and the practice. I'll talk to you a little bit about how would you, if you're a user of such tools, because you have contracts that you want to execute and discuss with counterparties, I'll explain how you go about selecting it. And if you are someone who would like to create such a platform, I'll try and explain to you how you should go about that too, where you should start, where you should look at for your market study and this kind of thing. Finally, a very personal view from my side about the next LinkedIn in this space, right? And the message I want to put across is that there's lots of platforms that do what LinkedIn does or purport to, but there's only one LinkedIn. And I think in the end, this is probably where we're going with this type of technology. I may be wrong, but I will back up my statements. And afterwards, I've been asked to dedicate or leave as much time as possible for Q&As. With that, I'll start with what. So what are contract execution and automation platforms? So there, on the very basic side, there are three main elements that such a platform must be able to do in order to qualify as a contract negotiation execution tool. The first is it must be able to replace exchange of document versions by email, right? That is a very bad process, in my opinion. And my opinion is based on 15 years of practice. in this space. I've had many accidents and near accidents using email with attachments, and I know a lot of other people who have. So it has to be able to do this as a basic. Another basic is it has to standardize change tracking protocols. So one of the interesting aspects of Microsoft Word and track changes is that after all this time, there isn't a standard way of using it or checking how it's being used. So someone will normally explain in the covering email, here is the version 5 of this document. I have shown you the changes that I made in track changes, right? Now, what if the person hasn't shown all of them? Are you going to check by accepting all the changes and running it against the original version or the version 4, or are you going to just take it on faith? And I have known of a $300 million loss caused when someone took it on faith. So you need to basically change, as part of this type of technology, you need to change the way change tracking protocols are managed. And finally, you need to be able to allow the replacement of a so-called wet signature, which is, with a pen, with digital signature in one form or another, be it qualified, level 1, level 2. So those are what I would regard as the basics. And then afterwards, you've got an additional stack that you can add there. You can create an approvals layer so that you can have the document improved internally and approved internally. You can have document creation, so people go a bundle on trying to match the exact terms that would raise the likelihood of success, which sounds great as long as it works, as long as you've trained the engine correctly. Templates is a big part, and Joern already mentioned that aspect. API, in other words, can it integrate into an existing landscape of contract lifecycle management? Content analysis, and Joern again mentioned this. Because you've got all your contracts now agreed, discussed, and stored in one place, can you create content analysis systems that then allow you to, for instance, when COVID-19 kicks in, work out how many of your contracts are subject to force majeure clauses and which ones? Just an example. Workflow process. So some of these tools go quite far into managing the life cycle of the contract, the workflow. So saying, you've got renewal dates at such and such a time, or you've got a payment date that you can expect here, and others less. But it's a flavor that can be added or not. And then finally, playbooks and quality checks and outcome predictions. And this is these are elements that go towards helping the customer define their own risk appetite, identifying whether the contract is likely to match up with that. And then one of them even attempts to predict, if you've changed this clause, then it's likely that you will take a little bit more time to agree with the counterparty because this seems to be an area that they're sensitive to. So in summary, you've got your basic on the left, those 3 elements, and then you've got some additional items. And I'm sure there are lots of other items that you can add to the basic package, but those are the ones or the main ones I've come across so far. So that deals with the what. What is a contract execution negotiation platform? Next, why? Why should we do this? Well, here's the point, right? It is a huge market out there. If you look at these facts, so we've got about 200 million companies in the world, of which 30 million are in the US. 95% of those are SMEs, or more than 95 probably. And some of them are large companies with thousands of people. And so that's your sort of target market for solving a problem. But what is the problem? Well, the problem is the total pain equals the pain points per process multiplied by the number of processes. So let's look first of all at the pain points per process. Why are we doing this fundamentally, and what could such a system improve over what we've got now, which in my mind is email with attachment. So when you have email with attachment, the audit trail is hard to reconstruct. So, you know, you might have emails in this guy's inbox, in this person's inbox. Some people may have stored documents here and there. How do you put that all together if ever you have a problem with the contract? Next, I've already mentioned this, but change tracking protocols are currently non-standard, and there have been losses, and I mentioned one that I'm directly and personally in knowledge of, which cost 300 million when someone relied on a statement about the protocol applied to with track changes. And that is a kind of black swan event, but there are some of those, right? So next, the processes create double work because sometimes if you're doing email attachment, you eventually have to send the result to a third party to process the result. Okay, so you've got work for one person as a drafter and one person as the data keeper, whereas you could actually just store it all in one workflow. Wet signature is inefficient and it can be problematic from a tax perspective. So typically in a large group of companies, some people working for certain of these subs need to sign documents in certain countries in order to escape adverse tax in the country in which they're signing, because they don't want to be considered to be domiciled in that state. So you sometimes have to literally fly to one country to sign this thing. It's hugely inefficient. And plus, with wet signature, you have to print the thing off, you have to sign it, you have to scan it back. There are a load of steps that you can avoid. Next, there is currently, if we're using templates, we often have a store for the templates. And then if we're doing it in Microsoft Word, we'll download one of our templates, we'll adapt it in Microsoft Word, and we'll send it out. But there's no easy way of connecting these two processes. There's a search and then there's a fill process, whereas you could do the search and fill much more easily if you're doing it in one place, if the templates live in the same place where you're drafting your contracts. Currently, there is nothing to guide document standardization. What do I mean by that? Well, if you have, let's say, 5 people across the company who are supposed to be agreeing contracts, you will have 5 different interpretations, and they may only be slightly different, but they will be nevertheless different interpretations of what is a good contract, what is a bad contract, what is a good clause in this space, what is a bad clause. And you will, in addition, have the commercial pressure of the client telling you that they would like to change this and that. So the advantage of these tools as well is that they can help to guide the standardization within your organization and potentially across a market. Another pain point is that currently organizations find it difficult to overview across a portfolio. We mentioned the force majeure clauses in contracts before, and some firms have struggled during COVID-19 to work these questions out. And of course, if you store everything in one platform, you can use simple text mining techniques to extract that kind of information, because you've got a single source of truth with all your contracts grouped together. Next, Microsoft Word is not ideal for drafting. It is a general purpose word processor, whereas a contract is by definition a sectional document or sequence of documents. So Microsoft Word wastes time as a contract creation tool. Afterwards, there's too much intermediation. So if you're one of these companies, one of these SMEs, right, you probably don't want to be running to your lawyer every time that there's a new question around one of your standard templates, because it falls out of your knowledge base. And so the way to do this is to centralize that knowledge in a single place. And that's where, again, this type of tool could be useful, because you could use it as a storage place for corporate knowledge too, and you could disintermediate the processes. And finally, media break. Well, at the moment, you jump between platforms, you create risks and inefficiencies. And I've been involved in problems here where the wrong documents have been sent to the wrong client, for instance, because there's a media break. You're going from what you've been doing in Microsoft Word to then what you've been doing in email, sending the email, maybe it's got the wrong attachment. So media breaks cause significant risks and inefficiencies. And so that is in a nutshell, the pain points per process, and there's probably others that you can think of too, but those are the main ones I could think of. And you multiply that by the sheer number of processes, and no one in the whole wide world knows how many contracts are concluded in the world. However, the elements that I know of come from IACCM, the International Association of Contract and Commercial Management, where they estimate that there are 100,000 NDAs, non-disclosure agreements, concluded every single day of the year across the world. So you can imagine that, that's just one category of contract, possibly the simplest that exists, but there are lots of others that are, not massively complex, but constantly agreed between parties, such as SaaS agreements, software as a service agreements, hardware agreements, support maintenance agreements, development contracts, consulting contracts, projects, outsourcing, many, many different types of contracts. And so there must be millions of contracts concluded every day. And I can't give you a better number than that. So if you look at the total pain, so why are we doing this? Well, because the total pain is huge. That's the message. And therefore the total market is huge. So we've had the what is it? We've had the why should we be talking about this today? And I've argued that it's a significant pain point that is being addressed. Now I talk a little bit about the how. And I talk about it from two perspectives. One is, how do you make it happen? What tech stack do you use? And secondly, a bit of the how is, what do we mean here by contracts? How, if we wanted to build a platform or to use a platform, what are the types of motivations that people have in creating them? And I will talk a little bit about their hidden or unconscious assumptions in building these things. Okay, so in terms of the tech stack can be highly sophisticated, or if you're just doing the three things I mentioned as being basic at the beginning, you could build that probably in a few months. So typical pieces in the tech stack include text mining, so that you can find content and so that you can look at usage trends. What are the popular clauses? What are the trending clauses? What are the clauses getting less usage, and where? What markets? Robotics is an important one. Robotic process automation, autofills of certain information from certain documents, for instance, or this idea of we're exchanging documents and the machines are helping us at various different stages. Then you've got, for the more sophisticated ones, you've got the insertion of, and by the way, when I say sophisticated, I'm not saying better. Sophisticated is a good thing if you have a sophisticated audience that know how to use it and you're prepared to spend the time getting used to or training the system. Okay, so don't take my word sophisticated as being a compliment necessarily, but the more sophisticated ones have artificial intelligence inside natural language processing and machine learning. And this is, these can yield great results. If you have your entire book of contracts or portfolio of contracts in a single space, those types of things can help you improve the processes over time and improve the quality of your contracts and better monitor risk. Blockchain is, yes, it's a buzzword, but often it provides very good plumbing for this type of system where you want to know, you want to follow every step in the way, and that could be an item, a block on the chain. Mobile technology, obviously people now like to sign their documents on the go, so that could be an element, and cloud is frequently an element now as a good way of deploying applications and creating flexibility in terms of the APIs that you can use and the different contexts that you can use this in. So that typically is the tech stack. And again, you could probably find one or two where there are significant other additions, but these are the main ones I know about. Next, a slightly more abstruse point here. So when I hear contracts, I always ask the question, what do you mean by contracts? What are you visualizing when you talk about contracts, because we all come to this notion of contracts with a specific prejudgment that we rarely question. So if someone's been working in the aerospace industry, to them a contract is either an NDA or it's often a huge contract for the lease or sale of an aircraft, right? So they tend to be either very, very tiny, simple documents or very, very long and complex, right? That's the assumption that they will come with. And so when you look at and we're going to do this in a moment, when you look at the type of solutions that people are building, the flavors that they're using to build these solutions, you will often find assumptions built into them that the creators themselves are rarely aware of. Okay, so let me talk to you about some. I'll give you 3 examples of some that I've come across. So one example of a tool that I will not talk about in this session, but is on a later slide, makes the assumption that everyone doing contracts is a lawyer in private practice, and that complexity in the solution that they're providing, this contract negotiation execution platform, is perfectly acceptable, because they're assuming that people are going to use it every day. They're a very sophisticated audience. They're going to spend the time needed to train, look into it, and train not themselves just, but the system as well, and become extremely familiar with it and then use it every day. But that assumption is not stated in the materials because it's a hidden assumption that they're making, because that's the world they come from. Second example is, the contract is just a part of a procurement, because the person who invented this tool and who manages it, and it was the founder, came from procurement. So their assumption leads to the conclusion that workflow in these types of systems is key. So there's a huge emphasis on workflow, and maybe not some of the other stuff that you might be looking for if you're coming from a different segment. A third example is that I've come across is, if we replace Microsoft Word as a word processor, the world will be a better place. And this is something I've heard from someone verbatim. And when I looked at their tool did very little apart from replace Microsoft Word, okay, which is fine, but it means that it doesn't do the full piece around contract negotiation and execution to the same standard throughout the process. It's a bit weak in certain areas. It's very strong in the contract creation approach and very weak in the later approach around security, around exchange of documents, and around signature. So concluding remark on the how is that form, function, and philosophy determine usage, and will often determine who goes for this platform finally. You know, someone who really just has already a CLM but doesn't know how to make beautiful documents and make them sensible might be tempted by this third solution here. But someone who's looking for a full contract negotiation and execution platform and doesn't have an existing landscape to do that won't be. So that's the how. So we've done the what is it? We've done the why is it a valuable tool? Why should we be discussing it today in this context, in the ReMeP context? And finally, we've looked at, okay, how, what types of technologies would you have to leverage to build one, and what type of thinking would you have to go through to create one that's of value? Now I just want to talk about 3 examples. And I've already mentioned Simplyfire, and I'm not going to give it any more time. I'm not here on our sales mission at all. I'm going to just give it the same amount of time I give to 2 others, so that we can talk about just, you know, the ones that are available. You can see their names here, okay? And I haven't, I'm sure I've left a few out, for which I apologize to the tool owners. But it should show you that there are quite a few out there already, okay? They tend to plow very specific furrows. In other words, they tend to be aimed at a specific market, whether they know it or not, right? So Avocat was developed out of the Allen and Overy Fuse program, which is essentially a Kickstarter program. And so what they produced is very sophisticated. It will take you a few weeks to understand exactly how it works. But I'm sure if you use it every day, it's going to be absolutely wonderful, and it's got lots of very clever features, particularly this, which is great. Enhanced insights using clause analytics, using commercial value and extraction. So this is that AI piece I talked about, where they can basically start looking at if you move this clause, or if you use this clause instead of that one, or if you include a clause in this category into your document, then here will be the commercial value, or here will be the disadvantage if you don't. So very clever, Avocat. Parley Pro is one of the more mainstream ones. It does its job very well, and it regards contracts quite a broad category of documents. It doesn't go for the types of fireworks that you can get in other systems, but it's really a very solid one. I've put their sales pitch here, and it's true, they save time, effort, and money. They improve compliance and control over the processes. They help to build stronger relationships, gain visibility, and minimize risk. So, these are the types of promises that these systems are making. The one I've got is Simplyfire. I just want to touch on it just so that you can also maybe ask questions about it afterwards if you'd like to know more about the thinking behind it, or the tech stack, whatever you want to know about. So this one promises link up and the democratic nature of the platform. So it's very low cost, and you get 1 year for free, which means that it's easy to sign up. And so the idea is that you should create a link up system so that you can go and find on there the people who you know already. It's ease of adoption, learn in less than 1 hour, etc. So as you can see, the flavor of this one is much more mass market, designed to have little onboarding time, little onboarding effort. It's not the cleverest, but it's probably the simplest. So, take your pick, look at all of these. Many of them offer free trial periods of about 14 days, so you could go and have a look at them if you like and test them out and negotiate with each other. So I wanted to bring in some examples so that you can see that it's quite an active market, quite a few players in the space, and it's an interesting space. In terms of selection or creation, so I've put both here, as I say, in case you're someone who just wants to buy one off the shelf, or alternatively, you're in a university now and you would like to build one for the future. Selection, I've put the different criteria you want to look at. So basically, you want to look at functionality. So will this have the functionality that you need to drive whatever it is you want to do, right? Afterwards, value chain. So does it cover enough of the value chain? Does it stop at life cycle management? Does it have no life cycle management features whatsoever, or does it include some? And does it include also the preparation for a quote phase, or not? The value chain of these systems is different, and you'll want to look at that and take it into consideration, deciding whether it covers enough of the value chain that you wanted it to cover. Next, business model. So is it expensive? Is it cheap? How long will I get to try it out? And what will the support look like when I've finally onboarded? These will all be variables which will determine the fit, as will user investment, by which I mean what time will your people or your colleagues or yourself spend working out how to use it, and even worse, working out how to train it if it's an AI-based system. How many documents will you have to find, clean, give over, tokenize in order to train your system? Is it an hour, or is it 6 months? This will be another factor that you want to take into account. Finally, integration. Do you have a landscape already and you're just looking to fill that one single piece of it, the contract execution and a negotiation piece, or are you completely greenfield and you don't have anything yet, so you could really use this to fill as much of your landscape as possible? So that's one piece. The second piece, so I'll if I have time at the end, which I probably won't, but if I do, I'll take you to this tool, which is very useful to help you select. But methods of selection, obviously you can do your own selection from websites. So you can just look at the various websites of the tools that I listed in the previous slide and see, is there anyone that grabs your fancy? You can do some free trials if you'd like to, whether you intend to buy or not. You can use a consultant, so you can get someone who's a specialist in your segment, whether it be a corporate or SME or university or whatever it is, and you can discuss your needs with them. Or if you want to build a tool, you can ask for their advice in the building of a tool. And then, as I said, I'll try and take you to this source later, but IACCM, International Association of Contract and Commercial Management, in combination with Capgemini, the consulting firm, have built a tool which helps you explain your need and then guides you to the systems that do what you're looking for and gives you a percentage match to those systems. So according to the criteria that you filled in, it's very, very nice. I think this is a useful link for you if you'd like to know more about this topic. Finally, creation method, and a lot of you will recognize this. This is the Strategizer business model canvas. And if you intend to create a contract execution and negotiation module or tool, use the basics of innovation approaches, right? So use a strategizer, try to look at your customers' jobs, gains and pains, and try to fit them to what your product is going to do, what it's going to do, what gains it's going to create, and what pains it's going to relieve for your client segment. But think about that very, very carefully and question your own assumptions, some of which you might not even be aware of. Now, I've given some examples of companies that had assumptions that they were unaware of before, but you will want to test yours too. Next, here is the bit I said I was going to talk about, and it's about the next LinkedIn. So LinkedIn has plenty of competitors, but actually there's only one LinkedIn, right? You see some of their competitors there that do something rather similar. And I think if you think about contract execution and negotiation, you can either go for a kind of software as a service approach where people pay you per seat. So if you have a corporate that has 50 seats, they pay you 50 times whatever it is, you make an income from that. And that helps the corporate to do their jobs better and to get more competitive and better in the market. If you're storing their templates for them, and if you're creating common knowledge stores for them, so much the better. You know, they level up, they go up in their performance, and they beat their competitors and get more competitive. That's one approach. But in my opinion, the winner is not going to be the platform with the most income, but rather like LinkedIn, it's going to be the one with the most members. And contracting is a team sport. If you want to be on a contract negotiation and execution platform, do you really want your clients to feel invited into your space where you have all the advantages and made to sign something? Or do you want a more holistic approach where your clients are also on it already and you can meet up with them and exchange? So something to think about. And I've put some hashtags here. Hashtag you cannot contract alone, right? You have to be with another party. And if you're on the same platform, so much the better. Contracting is a team sport, which goes without saying. Hashtag collaborate, because the collaborative aspect of contracting is very important. It often overshadows what the relationship that you're going to have with your supplier or your client or whoever it is after contract execution. It often overshadows that and gives a flavor for the execution period of the contract. And finally, buffalo theory. Buffalo theory is the theory that the herd of buffaloes goes at the rate of the slowest buffalo. Okay, so if you're two in a negotiation, the simplest negotiation you can have, you're two people, two parties. The contract negotiation goes as slowly as the slowest party. And we've seen in this COVID-19 period, some of the problems with that, and with that diminution in speed, is that sometimes you don't get the essential goods or services that you need in the time that you need them, because you're still discussing the contract. So, you know, I think all these things are worth taking into account when thinking about building, thinking about adopting, thinking about investing in, or just generally thinking about this type of platform. So, Joern, I hope that I haven't gone on too long. I am obviously, as I said before, I'm very happy to number one, stop sharing my screen, and number two, to go back to some of the materials that I referred to in there. If they're of interest, I could show you the ICCM contracting tool. I could show you different things, but I hand back just for a time check-in and to see whether there are any questions or whatever.
Thank you, Rory. This was a great introduction into the topic and in some details. I've got a couple of questions here. I also have a video that you sent me the link to, which makes it even more clear what it is all about and shows how these things work. So I propose to go for the video. Let's see. Video here it is. Now I have to, okay. Hope the audio will work. Here is the video. I make it full screen and now it should.
Welcome to Simplyfire, a platform designed to drive contract agreement in a spirit of co-op. On Simplyfire, you can create, approve, negotiate, and store contracts digitally. You don't need to use email attachments anymore or to search through your email inbox to recreate the audit trail. It's all in Simplyfire. Let's start with your dashboard. This is a list of your past projects focusing on efficiency and cooperation. The metrics we use are collaboration quality, number of loops, and time to close. The idea is to encourage you to keep your contracting setup efficient, collaborative, and simple. This is just a summary. The whole list of projects is itemized here: the good, the bad, and the ugly. The readability of your document is assessed using a standard algorithm. This is to encourage you to keep it understandable by everyone. Let's create a new project with a counterparty. That's the main purpose of the platform. You can do all sorts of processes in Simplyfire: contract approvals, negotiations, and more. Simplyfire is all about driving final agreement to the text of a document, one version at a time. Now you just want to do a simple negotiation. You give the project a name and decide whether or not to use the ICCM contract. Less frictional contracting. You want to create your contract, so you paste some text into the document panel. Want to add an ICCM contract standard? You just search for it using the search functionality on the right. Once you've selected the clause you want to add, you just click to insert the clause directly into your contract. You can add document attachments and form part of the audit trail. Ready to share? Here is the party I want to send it to. They are also registered users and you have them in your address book as a partner. You send it to your partner or counterparty and an email goes out to warn them that there's an incoming proposal. They're also alerted in the platform. Your partner will respond to it. How do they do that? They log into the tool and find the contract you sent, awaiting a response. They click on it and get access. Okay, here is the text you sent now. They want to make a couple of changes. The first is the price, so they will reduce the price a bit. And the second is to add some text for a definition. So they insert some text and they change another piece of text. They're going to put some comments to both changes. changes once they've made them are listed on the right here, and they can navigate through them if they want to. Now they send their counter-proposal back, and you receive the counter-proposal through the platform and by email. Here is the email. You can link in there to see what they have changed. It can't be very much because it's about 90% agreed. There you see something is waiting for you, so you go back in and check it out. Here you can see the change proposals and the comments. You don't have a problem with the changes, so you agree them in the system. After that, once everything is agreed, you can agree the whole document. You have a last chance to clean up the document if you need to. Assuming there's nothing to do, both parties have the chance to formalize their agreement by signing the document on the platform. They use e-signature, which is an efficient method of signing accepted as legally binding in an increasing number of countries. Once the signing is done, the agreed signed document is sent to you by email and stored on the platform. It's as easy as that. You then have the chance to rate the collaboration with the other side, which contributes to the cooperation index you see in the dashboard. In Simplyfire, you manage who you want to do business with. Group managers decide who they want in their group and how sharing should be done on the platform. Is the group manager allowed to see the whole group's documents or not? As a user, you get to decide who is on your partner network. You can invite new users onto the platform. They can join for free. It couldn't be easier. Feel free to practice this with a colleague. You can't break anything. If you're practicing though, just be careful not to sign and commit to something legally binding. Thanks for watching.
Okay, so you've seen a little bit how this can work. My first question is, what happens if both parties have a CLM, but a different one? I don't hear you.
I guess then it depends whether their CLM has contract agreement and execution module inside. Some of them do. So some of them, like Aptus have a concept called quote to cash, which is genuinely a full life cycle CLM, right? So someone having that and having spent the investment and having trained their people on the whole Aptus end-to-end system will not need what we've just seen, right? Because it's a small module within that value chain, which they already have. If they don't have that type of CLM that includes that piece of the value chain, then they can either use it apart, or we'll develop for them an API so that they can then use it and integrate with their systems. And you know, I'm not saying we've got it already. We would develop it if people needed it. And this is typical of a startup, but you'd find others, you know, you've just seen the Simplyfire site. If you look at another one, a number of other sites have developed or tools have developed their APIs already and are already ready if you need to integrate.
Okay. You said there might only be one platform surviving in the long run. What kind of login effect do you have? Can you export everything, including all the stages, all the changes that have been made during the course of a contract negotiation?
Are you talking about such tools generally, or are you just talking about my tool?
Well, you know your tool, but you know the other tools as well. So please refer to all.
Almost all of them have the full audit trail, right? I mean, that is one of the central promises of these platforms. They have a better audit trail than the one left by a cleaner audit trail than the one left by emails with attachments, clearly. And you know, the lock-in effect is, I guess it's diminished for some of the other tools by the fact that they allow a 14-day generally trial period, right? We allow a 1-year trial period. So the hope is that people use it. 50% of them will say there's no value to us. But at the end of the year, if you've been using it, you've probably got already a number of contracts on there. And pulling out may be more difficult, right? So there could be a stickiness aspect. In addition, I think it'll be cumulative, like LinkedIn was. And I'm not saying that Simplyfire is the LinkedIn of the future. I'm not saying that at all. It's not my prediction. But when you do get to the point where there's a sort of primary tool of that kind, like LinkedIn is in the sort of personal positioning and professional positioning space, then people will go because it's the only place to go, really. It's the only place to meet all those people and to raise your own game in terms of personal presentation. So lock-in effects might be things like the creation and storage of standardized templates, which are certified by certain bodies. There might be a number of those levers.
Okay. Well, in 2 weeks, of course, you don't have a lock-in effect, but can you migrate your contracts to a new platform easily? Is there something like a protocol that you can export your contracts and import it in a different platform?
It depends who you are. I mean, I guess if you're in the luxury position of being able to locate and export your contracts as one group, you're already doing well, right? Now, let's assume that you are such a fortunate person, because a number of companies, right, simply don't know where all their documents are. This is a fact, and it's some companies I've seen are in the Fortune 500, right, and are unable to do that, unable to bring everything together. But if you can, right, then it should be relatively easy to upload your contracts. But bear in mind, this is a contract execution and negotiation platform. So unless you're trying to leverage the text mining, for instance, unless that's so important to you that you would bother to upload your legacy contracts, you might not. You might say, well, I'm just going to start negotiating with my counterparties from now on such a platform, so I just need my standard templates. So it depends what usage you're going to put it to, which is also why I recommended that you really go through a careful assessment of what are my needs, or what are the needs of my clients, and what could really bring them value.
Well, we do business with a lot of people that we have already done business before. So usually when you negotiate new contracts, often you already have some old contracts you build on or you replace. So it makes sense to have all your contracts in one place. Otherwise, you're finding some contracts in the new platform, some in the old platform, some are in a platform that doesn't exist anymore, some are in a platform where the other party insisted on using their platform. So we might be faced in a bubble tower situation for some time. And if we finally have this kind of centralization or monopolization that you say will happen, and I agree with this assessment, there's a question, isn't it a huge attack surface? Because those contracts are in many cases confidential. They contain, well, business, they contain confidential information. They might contain personal data, of course, as well. But so would you trust such a platform if it's operated in the US by a company that might be subject to US sanctions, or that might have an important US competitor?
I think this is an important question, right? Where your solution is situated is pretty important. We chose Switzerland, we chose the cloud in Switzerland to avoid the questions that you raise. You're right. I would take that very seriously. Also look at the safety features of your system. Are the documents fully encrypted? Is there a bank level security system? Those are key considerations, because this stuff is your lifeblood, isn't it? If you look at a financial company, for instance, a financial company is nothing other than a group of people, talents, whatever you want to call them, and a group of contracts. That's all. So yes, I agree with you. Those are very, very important questions, which dictated a lot of the decisions that me and my partners have made in developing the Simplyfire site.
Okay. Well, we know Crypto AG, and Switzerland has lost some reputation there. But of course, putting it directly to the US might be more difficult. This leads us to two questions. First, is there any dependence on jurisdictions there? Do you think that it matters what kind of jurisdiction applies to your contract?
May I add to this question for myself? Because when you see the contracting nowadays going on, there's a software contract online, very quick, no reading at all, no. That's bad behavior, actually. And then, but we can go back to nature law, and that's 200 years. They've seen the contract as the main tool of, let's say, legal practice. So it a contract for everything, and because it's very big, efficient, dynamic, flexible, and provable. And I guess with these new tools, we have a good chance of doing that. And platform is mostly the development of fulfilling that. Maybe the best choice, and one will survive and the others not. And also may say that there may be different representations of a contract, the text, and maybe some kind of visualization, like the work of Mrs. Professor Hapio is doing that, or others. Then maybe also some kind of a logical representation that will be helpful for doing the programming and all this. So in the end, I guess it's good. But then you have to consider that you have so many jurisdictions, meaning we have 993 for states and many more jurisdictions. And yeah, somehow have to relay your contract to one jurisdiction. If you say Switzerland is the best, fine, great.
No, sorry, I'm not saying that at all.
No, it's a possibility. Sorry, yeah, it's a possibility. Switzerland is a good one. That's good. Austria is also a good one. Others also, but very often you may not have the choice saying, yes, that's it. Then you have consumers, and consumers have their own ideas, particularly also their sovereigns, the parliaments, the governments saying, yes, no, we stick with our consumers. Contracting must be done according to our rules. So there's a lot of variety that have to be done, actually, respected. If you are on the commercial side, it doesn't matter, actually, that's true. And I find it quite good if you do that. But if you're then on the, let's say, consumer side, it's important. And also here you may use these tools because you offer a more appropriate contract negotiation tool than what you offer now in a software contract saying, take it or leave it. That's maybe not the best. So that's it from my end. Then encrypted documents, we have everything encrypted. There may be a court interesting in that because maybe fraud and all this, then someone must give access. So there's a lot of seeing because I'm an international lawyer, and somehow we have states, and all law is related to a state. Maybe there are a few exceptions, and everything you do must be based on that. And it can't be somewhere because in the end, execution is done by states. Thank you.
Thank you, Erich. Rory.
I think there are various elements in what Erich has raised there. There's one, the element of security and privacy, which varies from one state to another. There is then the I guess notions of cloud and so forth that feed into that location of cloud. But there is also and Erich raised it too, and I think they're separate points around the jurisdiction of the contracts and the appropriateness of a certain form of contract for a certain jurisdiction. And these I see as two very different things. But relating to the second thing, jurisdiction of the contract, of course, your contract must be appropriate for the area that you work in and your jurisdiction. And they will be often very different. If you look at a typical American contract, it's about 2.5 times as long as a European one because they don't like things to be too contextual. They like it to be all textual. So it's very, very full. So any solution like this must allow the storage of private or company templates, which reflect legal precedents in the countries, right? And I wouldn't say, there's one contract that will apply in every single situation, even in a space as simple as NDAs. People have to take their own legal advice too and bring in their own templates a bit.
Okay, we have a question from Christian Sakida, which I find quite interesting. So if you have all your contracts in a central place, of course, this might generate some interest by hackers, by governments, by courts, justified or not justified interest, of course. And so some companies might say, well, we don't want that. We want to store our data on-premise, have an on-premise solution. Of course, on-premise is one thing, platform is the other thing. But through APIs, you could basically have two on-premise solutions communicating with each other and avoiding a centralized storage. And basically, if you think it further, it's basically what decentralized systems do. Do you think this would be something that could evolve?
Definitely, yeah. I mean, I think blockchain is going to underpin everything in the end, right? Or decentralized platforms, you know, be they blockchain or anything else. But definitely, I see it going in that direction. And regarding the interest of courts and regulators and hackers, these are two very distinct categories, right? Hackers fall into one, and regulators and judges fall into another. And it is legitimate for judges and regulators to take an interest in the content of contracts. And often the problem they encounter now is that people can't find them, right? Or they don't have the full audit trail of what was discussed when. So hackers, definitely. Hackers having a centralized platform creates a greater danger, which a decentralized platform like the one that you described, Joern, would do a lot of good for, wouldn't it?
Well, sometimes it's not that easy to distinguish both of them. So sometimes secret services hack, and they are given the right to hack. Some foreign hackers might be legitimate in their country, hacking a platform in another country that is not seen as being legitimate. So it's not always easy to draw the line if you're looking at different jurisdictions. And but I think this makes it clear that there is some important data there available that could be used for good or for bad. And of course, the government could also say, we will scan all documents, all contract documents. We might impose filters on contracts, saying if you have a contract with a consumer, we will not allow certain clauses to be in this contract, and we can execute it.
Great. I mean, you know, that's effective direct government. That is reducing the overhead of government and making it much more impactful. And of course, I'm not talking about the nature of the law in question or the clause or the fairness of it, but why not? Yes, it sounds great.
So the way that we contract might actually change completely.
Yeah.
Maybe it's more a tool of implementation too, and more compliance actually. So, but that's a trend also when you do this kind of negotiation tools, or also this kind of let's say templates available. So there may be particular for let's say not so well of people that have a contract available they can use easily, and find that's the right questions and negotiate a better contract to their good. And when it comes to particularly in Austria, the renting law is very difficult, very complex. So in the very end, may understand what the issues are. That's something you negotiate in the contract that's will hold before courts. That's also important. I guess this is the direction to go, and it's you see it in a positive way. If the parliament says yes, now we do it that way, that's fine. If someone else somewhere say that I don't like that, I don't know. And also I may also add to that, and it's also important when it comes to the blockchain, the change element. Yes, because you may have a contract that works very fine, everybody likes it, but then the Human Rights Court says we don't like this. There's a clause that should be changed because it's discriminatory. We have to change that for the future. Or the parliament may say we have a different policy. That's the element of change. You have also then to consider when you do this kind of smart contracts. So you have to offer the government the parliament some say, because they are regulators, you are mostly helping and supporting it. And you must be open to that, and that's a bit difficult, I guess, in the blockchain environment. And you may also said there's another workshop on blockchain by Monica Palmerani, and they say it's a deregulation element also. So the state decides which instruments are not done by me anymore. It's deregulation, so land register could be done also by this kind of blockchain technology, and someone else is doing it. Now, it's not the case in Austria because we have notaries, they like it, and they're doing a good job. But you can change that also, particularly in financial instruments, you can do that. And some ideas, fancy ideas that you say, in some areas, everything is done by contract, but and the state is just doing some kind of supervisory function. You can also say that's mostly good, for instance, in construction business. Nowadays, you have this kind of formal notice by the government. You can also say negotiate a contract with all my neighbors, how high, what I do, considering the standards by the local government, and not so much subject to the local civil servant saying, yes, hey, who likes this kind of building, or in Austria, it's the major of the city saying, yes, I like it that way, and if you don't comply, you wait another year. So I guess there's a lot of possibilities to do, and also different way of, let's say, interference by government if necessary. You may say this clause works very well, or it doesn't work very well because it's misused for some reason. We don't know.
Okay. Go ahead. Rory.
In a way, it's an old problem, isn't it? Governments changing their mind, and I recall that in the company I worked at before, we only discovered how many templates we had when international trade controls came in, and we had to introduce sanctions clauses into every one of our templates. We suddenly discovered that we had over 200 templates in one small part of the business alone, and the sort of business owners of those templates were spread all over the company. So we had to find out who we were, and then we had to say to them, okay, pull out these templates, adjust them by creating, inserting this clause. Oh, you need a Spanish clause. Oh, you need a French clause. Here's the translation. So it was a huge process. And so changing standards to reflect changing laws is, something we've always had to do. Maybe this gives us an opportunity to have a more centralized, a simpler approach to adapting to landscape changes like that. Potentially, it allows governments more direct intervention. And if governments start to introduce these kinds of platforms, then in a way, so much the better. I think they would be a good owner potentially.
One more question. When we look at how we collaborate, for example, if with Word, with paper documents, with Word, and with Google Docs, we see there is a clear evolution. With paper documents, we send it back and forth. We have like 2 or 3 days between every iteration. It takes a lot of time. With Word, we send it back and forth. We have tracked changes. It works already much better, but already it's cumbersome. We kind of need to wait until we receive things back. And with Google Docs, we can directly work together and collaborate. So this might dramatically change the way we contract. And there is a question regarding negotiations. Usually when you do a negotiation, you do it behind closed doors, and you don't want everything to be documented. Sometimes you want it to be documented. Sometimes only one party wants it to be documented, and sometimes you don't want it to be documented. What does it mean for contracting tools? Can you switch off the tracing? Can you? Is there a need to exclude something from the track record?
I would see it as being rather like email, that it's a permanent trace, and you should regard it as that, but you've still got the phone that you can pick up and discuss whatever you need to discuss, which sits in the background. But, if you're working for a big company or a government or whatever, when you've picked up that phone, there is an expectation that you're going to have to create a discussion note of some kind so that you record at least what you discussed with the other party. So you're right. It's a bit of a trade, isn't it? And you can never have a process that's so fixed that every single thing you say, everything bad joke that you raise to create the relationship with your counterparty or whatever, everything is recorded. You could never have that. I think it would be really unhealthy and it would probably stifle negotiations. So you're right. Overall, when you look at the whole process, the negotiation tool should occupy more and more space, but never the whole thing.
May I add some additional point? So Helena Hapia mentioned that you have different people negotiating it. So if the big boys or big girls, they say they have some kind of visualization of the contract, of the relations, and they agree on that, saying that's our deal. And then come the lots of big boys and girls, and then the lawyers, and they do the drafting and do the legal work, and maybe have done informatics say yes, that's our, let's say, our contract, our smart contract that's implemented in that way. And so particularly when it comes to consumers, maybe they have done an app where everything is in there and all this. So I guess to expect that also in your platform that you have different people and different levels of agreements, and also the government should reflect when they say yes. There's let's say one agreement, that's for the big ones, and then subject to clauses, to some conditions, and that's it. And then very end, after some 6 months, there must be a contract. Otherwise, there may be some damages or things like that. There may be many ways of doing this contracting, and also one is in Austria contracting. And this extensive contracting is not so old actually. So we had this kind of handshake contracts. Yeah, there's not much there. It's just to say we do it. But nowadays we have much more planning in the contract. So they reflect that's a very complex actually business where the contract reflects how you produce, how you deliver, and everything fits together very well and should also then be with high compliance. Otherwise, it wouldn't work very well. So that's a bit, let's say, a bit new, and I guess it will not change, or maybe it will change. I don't know. Rory, maybe it's.
I think you're right, Erich. In a way, that it's an extension of the point you raised before around the need for flexibility in these systems too, right? Around you can't have a process where right at the beginning you say the process of this contract is that this person is going to deliver it to that person, then that person is going to do this, and that person is going to do that. You can't know, right, at the outset. And if you have a process that blocks it, if literally Susan doesn't approve at that point, you may have a serious problem in the commercial relationship or a problem with the delivery of the product or whatever it is. So any of these systems need to be built with human flexibility in there. And you're right, it needs to adapt to the changing circumstances. I think that's key.
Maybe one more question concerning confidentiality. If you have a company collaborating from different offices, having a lawyer also collaborating on the side of a company, they want to communicate, they want to draft in private. Do those platforms support that?
Yes, so you basically separate out the internal part of the process from the external part.
So can you make changes and say, well, we want to discuss those changes first in private, and when we agree that those changes are good and that we should offer them to the other side, we disclose them to the other side? Right.
Yeah. I mean, they separate like you would in real life, right? They have to be able to differentiate between internal and external, and the two should, external discussions with counterparties should never be polluted with what we talked about internally, which is really behind the curtain.
Sure. But you do the manipulation in the same document. So you say, well, for example, there's a proposition of the other contracting party saying, we would like to include this, and then you're maybe the business owner of the business lead for the contract. You're saying, okay, I could imagine doing that. You put it in the contract, then you ask your lawyer, what do you think? The lawyer says, no, don't put it this way, put it the other way. And of course, you don't want this discussion to be disclosed to the other party, because they might say, well, no, I I want it the first way, and I agree that your lawyer thinks the other way is better for you, but not for me.
No, any tool, any process that breaches client attorney privilege by revealing information that was supposed to be between the client and the attorney is not fit for purpose. And so every single one of these, from the client perspective, if you can imagine the line, and above the line is internal discussion, below the line is external discussion, or vice versa, you really should be able to separate the two out and not have, you've got to be able to receive the incoming counter proposal and easily internally coordinate the response without revealing it.
May I add some additional point? In international law, we have subsequent practice changing the contract, and it maybe doesn't happen this kind of new contracting that you have to negotiate. Shall we go to the big boys or girls, do a new contract, change it, or just have subsequent practice, small changes that people can do themselves? There's one particular issue in international law in Austria, just to give an example. It's about flight routes with non-EU countries that has to be done by state treaty, approved by parliament, and very often, it's a bit heavy work to do that. So they say subsequent practice, and we change it by subsequent practice. That's not originally intended, but still it works in practice, and it's a way of doing it. But I guess this flexibility, as mentioned, there's more to come, and it's a bit of a question of also doing business. The more contracting I do, the more I can do also with my, let's say, service delivery framework, and the more better I can do. And I guess I need this tool to have my contracting in good shape also.
Exactly. I mean, you have to have in these types of tools, you have to be able to have associated processes. So you basically have your contract, and an associated process would be a contract amendment, right? And it has to kind of sit with the original so that you can then look through the lens of the entire contract documents and work out what the net contractual position is now. So that's very important, the interrelationship of these different documents. And afterwards, your point about, some of these changes you need one process path for, and another type of change you need another process path for. Your tool needs to be flexible enough, and whatever it is, I'm not talking about mine here, but your tool has to be flexible enough to allow that, both those cases.
Okay. One more question. There is an International Association of Contract and Commercial Management, and we talked about the need for standardization, the need for APIs to incorporate into workflows, the need to have the possibility to migrate your contracts to another platform. Can you tell us a little bit more about this association and what is the current status of standardization?
Very good question. And this is really what I've set out to do with my platform, right? I believe that standardization is one of the very useful routes to solving our trading problem, right? It's not the only one, but I think it could be really useful to standardize where we can. So ICCM is the International Association of Contract and Commercial Management. It's a huge organization globally. So nearly 100,000 members, and from all the biggest companies in the world. And they got it into their heads a few years ago that it would be appropriate for them to define standards. And the way they do it is they don't declare standards. They basically analyze what is the standard by taking a cache of documents, the documents that they find in the Securities and Exchange Commission's Erbguth store or online or whatever it is. They take these contracts, they put them through a process to work out what actually is the standard that people are using, the real standard, and then they improve the visual look and feel of it, and then they publish it. And when I came to that, to their conferences a number of times, I kept hearing that they'd done this, and I kept hearing that no one was adopting them. So it's really a problem of adoption is going the last mile. Defining a standard is a good thing. Potentially the standard could bring the two parties closer together at the outset. So there's less need to negotiate. There's less time and energy to negotiate. But there was a problem of implementation. The ICCM parked all their standards on their website and said, there you go, everyone, use them. And no one did because they didn't know how to, right? There was no easy way. And so really my tool is a response to that, just saying, listen, I'll make it possible for you to adopt these ISCCM principles and these standard clauses and these standard templates into your contract with one click. You can't get simpler than that. And if people genuinely don't like standards, then they won't do it. But if they do, and I talked to a number who wanted this, if they do want to move more in the direction of standards, then hopefully this should enable them to do it. Let's see what happens. Some industries have tried over the years to standardize. It's to some people it's a complete dream. I think it's possible to standardize more than we currently do.
Okay. How do you see the situation maybe in Switzerland, Austria and Germany, or in Europe overall, concerning the adoption of contract management tools and contract negotiation management tools? What are the driving forces? Is it big companies or lawyers, and what are the forces that tend to slow this progress down?
So the legal industry is very much subject to not created here syndrome. Right. So basically, if the law firm itself didn't create this tool, it's going to be poking it around like it's some kind of dead animal on the prairie. Very suspicious, right? So I would say that the huge firms, the ones that actually have now a department related to legal tech, right, or a really big IT department, they're now getting there. So there are some that are extraordinary. You've got Alan Overy, you've got Slaughter and May that are going really far in this, Clifford Chance, but most are not. Most are now looking, at the second tier, the European type companies. In Switzerland, the biggest law firm has about sort of 400 people in it, right? It's pretty small. Those types of firms are looking around for the magic bullet that doesn't exist yet. The tool that you can onboard to that looks exactly like you're used to, and that you don't have to pay that much money for, because law partnerships don't really like to pay a lot of money for stuff. They like to be paid a lot of money for stuff. But I'd say there in the smaller tier firms, adoption is not great. And generally in Europe, it's much less good than it is in America. These legal processes, people have not thought about it yet. So I think it's wide open. And there's great scope for companies doing this piece of the value chain, but also all the other pieces of the value chain to have a great time in Europe in the next 10 years. And welcome to the party, I'd say. Okay.
So is the billable hour syndrome still an issue there? That you need less hours to be more when you're more effective?
Yeah, exactly. So typically the lawyer, and I think you had a session earlier talking about legal education. And typically the lawyer model is, of course, the billable hours, and the longer you take to do a job, the more you can get paid for it. So the idea of bringing parties closer together by simplification and standardization is not always the type of news that makes private practice lawyers sing under the shower in the morning. And so indeed, I think it's a strong factor in this. And the ones that are very smart, so the Allen Overys, they now create more flexible legal provision services. So they have something I think called PeerPoint, which is now a much lower cost model where you can hire people who are associated with them, but who are not necessarily on that fee scale. So yes, indeed, I think that the pay structure of lawyers, the traditional pay structure of lawyers, has been a hindrance to the adoption of this kind of tool. And everyone falls into the trap of thinking that customers don't expect them to renew their business model and to be trying to be more efficient for their client and do better client service delivery. They just think that they've been all right with it so far, and if we tell them to be all right with it in future, they will be. Erich, sorry, I interrupted you.
It's in Austria with the notaries, and they have the right to do their contracts in certain areas only, mostly. They do also the certification, meaning that's identification and signature, particularly when it comes to land transfer and also the actually transactions with running business companies. And to give an example, also to handing over the farm from father to son, that's typically done by notary. So I'm waiting for the moment. Blockchain I couldn't expect, that's a bit too much, but still a good contract tool, maybe good, saying yes, we negotiate, I get it, I get some kind of what I get out as a old farmer from the farm, where can they live, what they can do, can I help you to get paid for it, much more you can handle than notary doing in maybe 2-3 hours at quite high cost. So they may go to the negotiated contract and say yes in the very end. The notary declares them, that's this and that, and maybe also at less cost, they have a better contract. And also maybe including people that have not so strong say at the moment, maybe the wives, also maybe children, as they may have also some interest. I guess in the very end, they made a contract. And there were some other contracts, so, but the notaries in the very end maybe not so happy because, for instance, land transfer means for them about several thousand euros just for doing a standard contract and you sign it before this person and that's it. And it's not even the notary himself, it's someone employed by him at low cost, or let's say reasonable cost. So there's some I wouldn't say dishonesty, but still there's some perks, easy money to make, and that may be gone in the future. Not very much loved by those who rely on it. That's
okay. When we talk about costs, those systems don't come free. So when I look in the fee structure, usually it is a monthly fee. So is it efficient for companies that have few contracts, or only for companies that have a lot of contracts? Or what? How would you think the fee structure, the pricing works?
Yeah, I don't think any of them have got it right yet, which is why in my app I'm doing it very differently, right? At the moment, they tend to charge per seat per month. So they'll say, 5 people in the company using it, it'll be whatever it is, $50 per month per person. And this is a serious inhibitor for small companies and for people who don't use that type of solution very often. So from my side, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a freemium solution so people can get the basic piece for free. If they do 20 contracts a year, it's completely free. Like that, it sort of helps to even up the competition a bit. People should be expected to pay for something that gives them value, right? Because a lot of companies have extracted the value from them in a very dishonest way in the last few years through stealing their data or whatever it is, right? That you certainly couldn't have in a contracting platform. You couldn't steal their data. My God, this is their contracts. So, you could also sell them advertising or whatever, but it's just so painful. So, in the end, if a company does do enough contracts and gets enough value from a system like this, they have to be prepared to pay for it. But you're right, there are entire categories of people who shouldn't need to pay for this kind of thing, who should be part of the ecosystem of the bigger players.
Okay. Thank you very much. I think this is a really interesting perspective, because you might actually get it from the low end. So mass adoption, not by big firms, but by small ones that say, well, I'd like to use Google Docs, and but it doesn't really fit, but I like to use easy solution that I might use for a couple of contracts, not too many, and getting the market from the bottom might be an interesting approach. Thank you very much. Thank you also, Erich, for inviting me, for organizing it, and for your thoughtful participation in the debate. I think this has a lot of potential. and we'll have to see what it brings. For today, I think that's it. I don't know, Eric, you want to say some final words?
No, there's a wrap up in the music piece. It's now happening now in the plenary on stage, main stage. Please move there immediately. And very nice. Thank you very much. See you then.
Thank you, bye.
So